Hello, this is my exam 3 presentation, and my name is Rachel Smith. Some topics that I will be going over are newspaper, internet, advertising. I'll be talking about some topics versus other topics, and then some miscellaneous words. Penny press or penny papers. The first newspaper had a lot of human interest stories and police reports in them. They were wrote by Benjamin Day, and his newspaper was called The Sun. The American newspaper with the highest circulation at that time was New York's Courier and Enquirer, a mercantile paper which sold 4,500 copies a day in a city of 218,000. In 1830, the most respected newspaper in the world was the Times of London, which was founded by John Waller. He was selling 10,000 copies a day. A number of penny newspapers had failed in Boston, but the first successful penny press paper was the Daily Times in 1836. Net neutrality is the Internet's guiding principle. It preserves our right to communicate freely online. In other words, net neutrality enables and protects our freedom of speech. Internet service providers should provide an open network and should not block or discriminate any applications or content that ride over those networks. Without net neutrality, our providers could choose what website we visit and reroute users to different sites. So net neutrality just kind of is a principle that, gives you the right to do what you want online and gives websites the right to show people what they want. Bricolage, or do-it-yourself. Bricolage is making multimedia artwork. It's using Photoshop or any kind of application to piece together different media. And these are 3 examples of memes. The little girl on the bottom, it's Thanksgiving Day, and she's really hungry. And then the ladies weave, and then the guy's saying, "Is Google a boy or a girl?" Obviously a girl, because it won't let you finish your sentence without suggesting other ideas. Crowdsourcing is when a group of people, usually online, are asked to contribute to a task in order to divide up the work and make it possible and easier to do. An example of this is our Recut project, where we all made a 30-second video of, I think it was like a really long video, and just think, if we had all had to make the whole video ourselves, that would have been ridiculously long and really hard to do. Another example of this I saw online was how Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo worked together to solve the problem of DDoS attacks. Agenda setting theory. Agenda setting argues that mass media tells us what to think about. They may not succeed in telling us what to think, but they do tell us what we should be thinking and talking about. An example of this is Ebola. Back in October 2014, Ebola was a huge thing on the internet and the news. Everyone was talking about it. But also there was an election going on, but really nobody talked about it because Ebola was what the news and the media had told us to think about, which is agenda setting. How does going to school compare to making a movie? In some ways, college and movie making are both a gamble, hoping to win big. College career mirrors the risks taken by a big studio planning a major film. But instead of tens of millions of dollars, we're just investing tens of thousands of dollars. But it still makes sense that individually you'd want to reduce the risk where possible. So like for instance, in college you want to reduce the risk by, going to class and, really being attentive and thinking critically about what the professor's, talking about. But in movie making, they, want to get the best actors, the best well-known actors, and a really good crew that will help them, make the best movie. Native advertising. Advertising is mediated communication with an audience, not necessarily customers yet. In the 18th century, in the colonies, announcements of goods on hand. Benjamin Franklin's Pennsylvania Gazette reached out to readers with new devices like headlines, illustrations, and advertising placed next to editorial material. In the late 19th century, the birth of brands and of the ad agency. Also around that time, magazines improved quality and added color, and newspapers were starting to get really in demand. Color lithographs in Europe pushed the artistic and creative side of advertising. Many famous brands included racial stereotypes. An example of this is in the top right corner of Aunt Jemima with her pancakes. Internet advertising surpassing newspaper advertising and the implications of that. In 2010, internet advertising did surpass newspaper advertising for the first time, and it's not expected to return. But, this is really good for advertising people because using the internet is usually a lot cheaper and easier to do, and you can also reach a bigger audience by, not doing so much work. For instance, you can put up a tweet, on Twitter, and it may reach, thousands of people, whereas instead, you could put a column in the newspaper, and who knows who's going to read that. But for the newspaper, they've lost a lot of money. If your main source of revenue comes from advertising, then, you don't have the money to pay your staff, so you got to cut back. And it's just made a lot of changes. The rule of 7. This is a rule of thumb that suggests people need to see an advertisement 7 times before they can act on it. But there is no guarantee that seeing something 7 times will make a person go and buy the product or vote for the politician or take some political action. Instead, the point is that consistent messages that are repeated are key to getting the point across. This increases the probability of your project. Seeing an advertisement 7 times is not a large task with the ease of online advertising. As you can see ads through pop-ups, on the side of Facebook. If you play a game, usually there's tons of advertisements on Pandora. There's just pretty much unlimited ways of advertising on the internet. The third person effect. In class, the example we were given was the guy who was crazy and he was preparing for the storm and he said everyone else was going to go buy bread and milk, but since they were doing it, he had to do it. The assumption of when you hear something is that you assume they have heard it too and that they will be swayed by the message. And the action is you or I may act on our assumptions about what they will do. So he assumed that they were going to go get bread and milk, so of course he had to. The strategy is by understanding this effect, the military strategists, PR people, and advertisers can manipulate us to kind of do what they want, or at least, get us thinking about it. Some people abuse this by justifying surveillance, voting based on a presumed winner, and hoarding and preppers, and squashing dissonance. Marconi versus Tesla. Marconi was a businessman that worked in England where he was introduced to the wireless telegraph to the Europeans. He filed a patent protection for his radio apparatus between 1896 and 1897. He established the Wireless Telegraph and Signal Company in 1897. In 1901, the first transatlantic signal sent by Marconi from Ireland to Canada. His radio apparatus is considered to be the reason that over 700 people survived the Titanic disaster, which that's incredible. It's just crazy to think that back then, something as small as the radio and telegraph could really be that important since it's not today. Tesla was a scientist that discovered the basis for most altering current machinery. In 1892 and 93, Tesla wirelessly transmitted electromagnetic energy. His first public demonstration was in St. Louis. In 1884, he sold his patent right for his system of altering current dynamos, transformers, and motors to George Westinghouse. He also went on to invent the Tesla coil. I really think that Marconi and Tesla are definitely the two most well-known people of, the 18th century for, the radio and the telegraph and just making huge strides in communication at that time. Appointment viewing versus binge watching. Appointment viewing is where families would watch a show as it aired live at the same time every week during the fall or spring season. Some examples of that today would probably be like American Idol or Dancing with the Stars, or it could even be like fall baseball, or, In 1950s and 60s, appointment viewing was common. A handful of networks dominated the airwaves and could claim up to 40 to 50% of nightly viewers. Which, if you think about it, if 50% of the viewers are watching your show, you really have a huge, fan base, and you can really influence a lot of people. In some ways, shows like this are DVR proof due to the fact that if you don't watch a show when it first airs, you'll hear the results before you watch it later. Like a sports game, you'll definitely see someone tweeting about it or posting about it before you can have a chance to watch it yourself. Since Netflix has made watching shows and movies easily accessible, many people will watch show after show, which is referred to binge watching. Binge watching isn't inherently bad, but it does take up a lot of time and keeps you sedimentary, which isn't healthy for long periods of time. Binge watching isn't going to end anytime soon with competitors such as Hulu and Amazon. Yeah, I actually had fasting for exam 2, but I know a lot of people who binge watch talked about how they had like really bad headaches from sitting around all day, just watching TV. They were exhausted, so really just like sitting around watching TV all day really does have an effect on you, whether you think it does or not. So I think, binge watching is going to become a bigger and bigger thing, but I think, over time you will really be able to see the effect it has on people. Sydney Royal and Carrie Brown Smith. I will go ahead and say, as you can see by the star, I chose Sydney Royal is really who I think would be a lot, me personally, I think I would like her a lot better to work under. She works at Texas University, which I have family there. She focuses on new media, and she deals with women's studies, and she sees how she had one example of how she worked like on the internet and thought about how women's reactions to different things. But I just found it really interesting because I took a psychology class actually my first semester here, and it was just so interesting about how women really just think a lot differently. Her resume is really good, and she's a blogger, but Carrie Brown Smith had a really good resume and a blogger. She also had won 2 very prestigious awards, the Top Paper Award and the National Educator of the Year. So I thought she's pretty good too. The Holstein Manifesto. The founders were Dave, Mike, and Fabian. They created this manifesto that they could reflect back on if they ever felt stuck or found themselves living according to someone else's definition of happiness. I don't really remember talking about this in class much, but I just thought it was really cool that these 3 guys, thought if they ever, were going through a hard time that they could just read this and that it would, get them back on track and lift them up. 7 things I wish I knew about college. How important it is to be on a first-name basis with professors, how it's important to go to class every day, that scheduling is very important to get your homework done. Getting along with your roommate is a must. Going to the gym, because freshman 15 is a real thing. To take hard classes at a junior college, because that'll definitely help your GPA. and that Netflix is your worst enemy. It really is. And this is my presentation. Thanks.